This is part one of Rob's share.
Yeah, my name's Rob, I'm alcoholic. I just wouldn't mind starting and just by thanking the committee for putting this on. I think it's a wonderful event. I think it's a great place to hold something like this, and well done. You know, you deserve a round of applause for the work you've done. I just want to start the session with a prayer. It's a prayer that I heard a lot of years ago that pretty much I like to hear every now and then. It says, God, today help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about others, and everything I think I know about my own recovery, so I may have an open mind and new experience with all these things. Please help me see the truth. Amen. Yeah, well, the bar's been set pretty high by Colleen, you know, and so it's I'll try not bring it down too low, but I'll try and do my best up here and carry some sort of message. It's something that when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll start right at the end. I was at a meeting once and I heard a lady say, I don't know where I'm going to begin. And a bloke yelled out, why don't you try starting at the end? So I'll start at the end, and I'll start 6 weeks sober, because I don't think anyone, when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't think anyone's got any understanding of our inventory process, of any of our step work. And it's something when I come into AA, then I start to grasp that. And I know people go on different journeys. People bounce in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous before they find a sponsor. People are around for long periods of time. They're all different sorts of... Chris said it, you know, we're all different. And we all find our own way. And when we find our own way, we do. When we hear, we're meant to hear, we hear. And, you know, I was 6 weeks sober in 98. My sobriety date's the 11th of February, 1998. My home group's the Adelaide Big Book Study in South Australia on Monday night at 6:30. Everyone's most welcome now if you're in Adelaide. And yeah, I was 6 weeks sober at a meeting. I'd been bounced in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I couldn't stand the way I felt without a drink in me anymore. An old-time member walked past me and he goes, how you going, Rob? And it was a lot of like, just keep coming back. Don't take the first drink. And I was nuts. I was really struggling. The part Colleen spoke about, that ferret in the mind, had me convinced that death was the best option. And I didn't realise how close I was at the time to leave and not being here today. I really didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't know what to do. I was in that meeting and I just couldn't drink anymore, because I couldn't stand waking up not remembering the shame and guilt and the remorse I felt, and the terrible feelings I had within me, though. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't live with it without alcohol, and I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what was wrong with me, how dark it is before the dawn. There was a member at the meeting and he got called to speak, and halfway through that meeting he stood up and he spoke about that insanity to drink against his own will, that mental obsession and the phenomenon of craving, the allergy, the abnormal reaction that alcoholics have. And he spoke about the insanity that we suffer from, what we need to be restored to. He spoke about what his will in his life was. He spoke about God-given instincts and an inventory process that I'd never heard before in a meeting of AA, in an ID meeting back then in Adelaide. It was almost like a criminal offence to share that stuff. I noticed that half the meeting got up and walked out. And at the end of that meeting, people were trying to keep me away from him because we were talking, and we sat out there till 1 o'clock that night. We at the front of the hospital meeting, and he drew me the step one cycle, stage by stage by stage, straight out of the doctor's opinion. And we went over, and I learned that I'm that abnormal drinker. I can't control the amount and guarantee my behaviour when I drink. And it was progressing in me, and I also learned what the loss of choice. You know, and I knew I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop picking it up. But I didn't realise, like a lot of people do, I didn't realise I was sick. I thought I was just weak, inadequate, a coward. I didn't know that I was in this obsession that was out to kill me. It was going to take me out, and it almost had me. And I realised that loss of choice for me is when I can't bring into my consciousness what happened a week or a month ago, or the consequences of what's going to happen when I take a drink, and that insanity wins out, and I'll pick a drink up and I'll put it in my system and trigger that craving again, and I'll go on a spree, and I'll emerge remorseful from that spree with a lot of fear, guilt, shame, and I'll become restless, irritable and discontented, and deal with everything else that's happening in my life at the time. my life was burnt to the ground. I had nothing. I had a lot of money, and I didn't know what to do. And I sat out there outside of this meeting. It was a great time for me. It sounds terrible, and it's like the worst possible scenario that could happen in my life. It happened. I look back years later, that was the best place for me to be in. I could hear. I had nothing. I had nothing that could stop me from getting that time in my life, back in 98. It started an amazing journey for me, and I came to believe in him. That member, I had no religious upbringing, and my religious upbringing was on a Sunday morning, and Christian people would come around our house, and they'd knock on the door, and my parents would say to all us kids, "Don't anybody answer that door." You know what I mean? It was a fairy tale for me. God was a fairy tale. I didn't know anything different. I didn't know about spiritual principles, or it was very foreign for me. Standing out the front of meetings is very foreign. I was totally ashamed. Well, Colleen said, it's about finding your voice in Alcoholics Anonymous and in the world out there, in meetings at work, amongst family members, amongst life, and being able to engage with people without asserting yourself, without resentment and fear, have that normal emotional security. That's why I drank. I drank to feel that, so I could say things to people and not feel nothing. So I didn't take things away with me and replay and re-feel and relive things over and over and over. Believe the fears in my mind that'll tell me you're no good. You ever sat there in the morning and you got the story going on about what's going to happen in the day, what's going to happen at that meeting, what's happening, and you realise you're just sitting there by yourself and no one's even in the room with you, in your own voice and your own thoughts and your own mind. Our literature says fear will be classed with stealing, and I can see why. If I let it, it'll take away my friendships. It'll take away my place in Alcoholics Anonymous. It'll take away my wife. It'll take away my job. It'll take everything that's good in my life, and that's what it wants to do. And leave me with nothing and alone, and the obsession will come back, and I'll be, in that depth of it again. I don't ever want to go back. That's why I'm so grateful to people who put these things on and be a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we had a convention recently in Adelaide. It was great. It's great to be part of these sort of things. You get a chance to meet a lot of nice people. I know a lot of the people here I know really well, and I love very dearly over the years that I've met in AA. And yeah, AA is a beautiful thing. And it just gives us that treatment that settles me down enough so I can get out of myself enough so I don't need to take a drink of alcohol. Fits it up, quiets my mind enough so I don't have to listen to the story of what's going on. I like the ferret. I've never heard that before. Like the ferret going on in my mind, Yeah. Back to 98, we sat out the side of this meeting and we read through the doctor's opinion, and he was actually from a member from the Triangle Group in Melbourne. He was a friend of Chris's. Years later, we recognised our friends, and I got to know Chris and Mandy, and yeah, we sat outside that meeting, and he became my first sponsor, and we sat down, and he was there. He wasn't working. I wasn't working. I had a lot of money. I was ducking and weeding from everyone. We just had time. We read through the first part of the big book. It was great. I loved every minute. I'd explained stuff I'd never heard before. All the stories and more about alcoholism, about Jim and Fred, and the person that can't drink for 25 years, and out come the carpet slippers and bottle. We all recognise that with sometimes members within Alcoholics Anonymous. That insanity can come on people at any time. It just, sometimes people sit there for a long period of time, and that's okay too, It's not up for anyone to tell them they can't. And we got to We Agnostics, and, I didn't never like We Agnostics, because, it was the God thing, and he explained to me, took me to pages 46 and 47 in there, because I didn't know. I looked at God as we understood him. As I told you, I didn't have any understanding of God. And he said, Rob, you can have your own conception of God. And it opened the door for me enough to be able to keep pushing on. And then the thing that impressed me when I heard him share that night what his will in his life was, his thinking and his actions towards his God-given instincts, the resentments, fears, and his conduct. And I relate to that stuff when I'm not drinking. I was 6 weeks sober at the time, and I knew that I was in deep resentment with people. I had a lot of unresolved conflict. I was reliving and replaying incidents that people did to me. And I had a lot of fear constantly going on within my mind. It was just a daily struggle to stay alive at that time. So, and we sat down, we did as Colleen said, the statutory prayer, we got on our knees and I just followed everything he said. I didn't know what was going to happen. I used to sit in AA when I've heard people talk about the steps early on. I thought, here we go, Jesus Christ and ginger ales, you know what? This is where it's going to go. You know, they said that had spiritual awakenings. And I thought, my God, I'll end up in that Salvation Army band around the corner and drum or something like that. Is that what happens when you turn spiritual? You know, no disrespect meant to anyone that does that in here. And I got this scene where I told Chris, no jokes today. Well, my jokes go down like a lead balloon in the middle of the road, and no one laughs, and I just deer in the headlights, you know, like, and but yeah, you know, like you know, and it explained all these things to me that with our God-given instincts and there's stuff. Years, guys, no, I wouldn't have. I didn't have a clue. How do you know when you don't know? I didn't know. And he explained the importance of it, though. And he explained the importance of doing a thorough 4-step inventory, dealing with our resentments, our fears, and our conduct. And we sat there and we got that part of the book, and in there it says, dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. I think it says we listed people, institutions, and principles at whom we were angry. And he said, we're going to do this one column at a time. And we're going to start, and then it got to the instincts. Usually it's affected your self-esteem, personal relation. Bill Wilson uses words that were written in the 30s. My sponsor said to me, he goes, Rob, you know, material financial security. We went through all the dictionary meanings of it, self-esteem, we think of ourselves high or low, and all this pride, a justified or excessive opinion of oneself, either self-love or self-hate, generally what we think people think of us. Emotional security, those tend to dominate. Or there's those that are emotionally insecure. They're totally dependent upon everyone. I identify with that. I was totally dependent on you guys. I was totally dependent on people to tell me what I wanted to hear to boost my own self-esteem and pride, get my own way. When they didn't, I can remember ringing my mum and dad up and I needed cash. I was in a jam. I was stuck. I had nowhere to live. It was their fault. My mum was an alcoholic. I watched her family with 10 brothers and sisters. There was heaps of alcoholism in there. I blamed her for everything that was happening in my life. Money. I need cash. I've got nowhere to go. We can't get it to you, Rob. Mate. They're welled up within me. I need cash. Don't you love your son? You know, like all this sorts of, it's your fault I'm like this. And that's you know, you guys relate to that because it's so true. It's blame, you know. Like I didn't know that, and then of course I hang up, swearing and carrying on. You know, that's the sort of sickness I was in at the end, and totally reliant on the system, unable to work, unable to function, unable to be around people with the mind I had. I couldn't last a couple of hours and think people judging me or they knew what happened the other night or the guilt and shame, some of the crap I was doing when I was drinking and the way I felt. My God, I was at my first AA meeting, my jeans were still soaked in the urine stains, you know, like that's where I was at. And you know, like it's not a pretty picture to paint people, you know, like to, and you know, like I remember a lady walked up to me at a meeting I was first in and she goes, Rob, you made it back. You made it. And I think, made it? I'm nice in the toilets. But you know, when AA people say that stuff, you know, I'm thinking, my life's in ruins. Made what? And she made Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, like, I'll just tell a quick story. I said to Chris I wouldn't, but I will. The other day, me and Chris have got the same sponsor. He's a great bloke. I love Bob D from Vegas. He's a champion. He's just a really nice guy. I'm speaking to Bob, and I'm currently National PI, Public Information Cooperation Professionals and the Community Coordinator in Australia. And yeah, and I said to him, my time's up at the start of January. I finished the role, and I said, you know, we're talking about what do you want to do, and rah rah. And I said, I'm not sure, you know, like there's a few things open. And he goes, why don't you just wait? And when they ask you, say, listen, that might interfere with my job. I'll just wait to be king. And I lost it, you know. So as I'm coming home from work, and because I went shift work at Adelaide, and I'm ringing Bob, I'm talking to him, and I'm just in tears, man. I've got tears rolling down my face. I think he knows me well enough because he knows himself that I just need that. I need that laughter. I need to not take myself so seriously. Or it gets too much. It's just still to today.
You know, it's still to today. I need the daily on awakening as we go through the day when we retire at night. I need that stuff. I need this. I need the inventory process. You know, and after we talked about instincts, and back in '98, I looked at the first 3 columns and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, they've hurt me really bad, some of these people. You know, my mum wouldn't lend me money. You know, my mum doesn't love me. My mum, I got alcoholism from her. My mum, her family's sick. My mum, imagine God sometimes, you know, like, there's that done this, I've done that, I've done this, done that, Imagine God, he goes to talk back and don't hang it up. Because that was me. It still can be, you know, it's my problems, my stuff. You know, literature says selfishness, self-centered, driven by 100 forms of fear. You know, that's me. And I had this tree card, I had a massive inventory. I'm ashamed of it now. Just the way I was at the time. I was a drug dealer in my late teens. I needed money. I didn't want to work. I needed to drink. I didn't want to be around people. Like, just getting to that abnormal place where that's the only people I wanted to associate with. And I just felt comfortable around. Being around normal people was not comfortable for me. You know, it's just that you don't recognize that at the time. And you put this facade like some sort of tough guy. And I was a coward. That's just the truth of it, you know. And, we looked at all this inventory and he said to me, I rang him up, he showed me how to do it, the 4th column, and where you look for your own wrong in the matter and where you're selfish, dishonest, seeking, a fright. And then, you know, he says it now, I think it says, you know, not your fault. That's not all your fault. We disregard the other person. You try and look for our own wrong in the matter. That's hard, man, to someone, but, you know, there's a little prayer in there. We ask God to show us tolerance, pity, and patience. Us, tolerance, pity, and patience towards them. It's the prayer I still use today. And, I started on that and I ran through it. And he said, Rob, also write all your harms, whatever you've done to the people, any money you owe them, and go through and just write it all out in the 4th column. And I did. It was, you know, I had nothing to do at the time, so I just went and done it. I just went through. There was a lot of resentment there. And he said one thing, he goes, notice that the word fear is bracketed along each resentment. Is what I want you to do. I want you to write what you're frightened of. You know, and I started to look at, you know, people rejected me. I was resenting them because that's my fear of rejection. I was a kid at school. I didn't like the kid that always put his hand up. I thought he was a smart ass that always answered the questions. My fear of failure, that resentment was driven by it. People criticised me, judged me. I can remember this old guy. I was 25 years old. And I'd lost it, and I was rocking up at his hotel, and I'd borrow money off him, no recollection of it, and I come out of a blackout, and I was sitting at the bar, you know, there's a girl I went to school with, she's running around spraying me with Impulse, and the stunk, and he's having a go at me, saying, what the hell are you doing here, mate? And I'm like, I almost fell off my chair, who I am, man. You know, urine stained jeans. I don't know, you know, like people horrified sitting in there. I don't know what people looking at me. And I realised that he told me the truth. And I resented him. And that resentment was driven by my fear of the truth. Had nothing to do with what he was saying. I didn't have any discernment of that between criticism, judgment, truth. I think I have a middle ground for that. It was all, if anyone said something to me, I took it personally to heart, whether it was truth or criticism. I didn't know the difference. And I was in that place where I was relying on, totally dependent on people to tell me what I wanted to hear. And I was spiritually sick, our literature said. It's like spiritual malady. You know, Colleen said it when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. It's I finally finished that inventory, and I 6 weeks sober, 7 weeks sober, and people at AA were, at the time, you know, 1 step a year. You know, it's just good to be here, you know, to hear people share about our program and that, because it was 1 step a year, just keep coming back, you know, got time. Some of us haven't got time. Some people have. Don't get me wrong. Some people have got time. They just sit in AA, and, you know, like our literature's pretty clear, though. People that can still have the power to choose and not live on a non-spiritual way of life haven't probably got the obsession to drink alcohol. Our literature says that. People that this book's not going to appeal to, they're not going. If you, as I said, I sponsor a few people too, and if they don't want to do this, I say, don't do it. Why would you? Who wants to come to believe in a power greater than himself? Who wants to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, really? Who wants to do an inventory? Who wants to share with someone your deepest, darkest crannies of the past, our literature says? Who wants to talk about your sex conduct, your conduct in life? I certainly didn't. Who wants to go back and pay money that you got away with? Not a chance. I owed heaps of coin. I thought fresh start. I was racked at a meeting. Old time member said, just keep coming back. Don't take the first drink. I thought, beauty. Hey, that's all I need to do. And it's just, you sit there and you're thinking, who wants to do moral inventory? Who wants to pray and meditate? My God, are we going to become monks? Who wants to take the time that it takes to sit with someone across the table in your house to show them this literature program? Only the people that are dying will do that. And I was dying. That's why I grabbed it. And we got through my resentments and finally, and I had all my fears. I went through and listed all my fears, and he said, put them on another sheet of paper. And then all your harms, put them on another sheet of paper. We talked about stuff and fear, and fears ruled my life. And even in recovery, it talks about the fear, false evidence appearing real. It just is the boogeyman for us. It just is one of the defects of Karen. I promised Tony I won't go into steps 6 and 7 too much, so I'll be really careful. Usually I'm a bit of a shooter from the hip when I'm sharing. Anything could come out, so, and fear, like it's
This is the end of part 1. Listen next time for part 2.